Hi everybody, my name is David and this is All Things Sacred. I'm continuing my interim series here, so just a bunch of various topics that will help to set up for the deconstruction during the sheets. And I'm also starting to plan on incorporating a few meditation videos as well. Those could be very useful. I mean, I could talk about this stuff all day, but without actual meditation, without actual quiet practice, it won't be very useful. You won't actually be able to dissect yourself very far when you're looking into the sheets unless you're able to like silence all these various aspects of yourself, silence these false identifications. And my main reason why I wanted to do these videos in the first place is because I feel that a lot of the topics that I covered before, or my approach to the topics at least, my approach to the tarot, for example, were very much from a very cosmic perspective, very, very big and lofty goals to attain. And I am now focusing more on the practical wisdom for the person who is very new to the path, who has to break through a lot of these barriers, break through a lot of these sheets that I'll eventually get to talking to. And as I do talk to, and you'll see when I get to the series, that I'm just talking about them in relation kind of to everything, because the sheets are just our various misidentifications of self, so this includes pretty much everything. And one of the main things that a person has to do early on in the path is approach their unconscious being, approach their subconscious self. There's like their conscious mind is created by a set of conditions, a series of conditioning that they have gone through to create a persona, an image, an idea of who they really are. But there is, in all reality, a vast network of subconscious thoughts and images, ideas, just a subconscious flow that goes to influence the conscious self. And this subconscious self is kind of in like a cage of conditioning. The conditioned mind or the conditioned experiences create this cage that hold the subconscious back, that allow them to channel through a small sieve as the conscious self, as the what a person will recognize themselves to be. And this person, when there is a lot of conditioning that blocks one from being able to look into their subconscious depths, the various aspects of their self that they're unwilling to look at, then that conscious being, that personality, that individual who they share with the world will often be an individual who is full of hypocrisy, who is full of anger and frustration, of tense nerves, of anxiety and depression, of a lot of negativity, there's not necessarily anything wrong with negativity. I'm going to talk about that in this video, how why we're experiencing so much oftentimes negativity in our life is because we're unwilling to look at the psychological images of this negativity. For example, we might be going through a depressive state. We might be having a lot of depression and a very negative outlook on the world. And that's because we're often we're blaming the world. We're like, the world is such a horrible place, and this is all, this is a type of depression. I'm not talking about just depression in general, but a type of depression that might be very misanthropic. And a person will only be experiencing this misanthropy because they're unwilling to look at their own self, and when they're like, oh, humans suck, they don't often take into account that they're part of that human group who they consider to suck or whatever, to be negative, and they don't recognize the part that they play in their negative outlook, that they fit the category of what they're projecting. And so what I'm talking about here is projection. That's what happens. This subconscious cage of conditioning holds back all of our multifaceted personality, and we believe that we're this very rigid box of personality, that we like certain things and dislike certain things, and we act certain ways and don't act in other ways, when in reality we have the potential to be anything. We have the potential to like or dislike anything, or to enjoy or not enjoy. We have the potential to be anyone. We just become very psychologically attached to this idea of this is who I am, and a lot of times we'll think that this person who we're holding up on this image, this false self, this idol of ourselves that we're holding up on a pedestal, we'll think that we've created this ourselves, and we won't realize that it's created by this cage of conditioning. I'm talking about the cage of conditioning a lot, which is another video I want to do soon after this. But I'm more so talking about the shadow. So really what I'm talking about is that true psychological self. That true self, at least on a psychological level, who you really are. And that person has a vast array of being. They're not that conscious self. And the problem occurs because we are afraid of a lot of those aspects of ourselves. We see those things as negative. But in reality, just because you have the potential for anger, just because you have the potential for, jealousy or fear or whatever it might be, just because you have those potentials within you, it doesn't mean that those are bad qualities about yourself that you need to get rid of. I mean, one shouldn't be like, I have the potential for anger, so I'm going to be angry all the time. That's not useful at all. One should see that violence within themselves. At first, when they're not looking at it, they're going to be projecting that violence outwards. And they're going to be blaming others, they're going to be seeing that violence in others, and they're not going to be able to take it upon themselves. But when a person begins to reflect, stop blaming the world, turn around and look for the negative qualities that they see in the world around them, in themselves, they start to realize that they have these qualities in themselves, and so they're able to reflect and see them. And a person then is able to begin to integrate by recognizing that, I do have the potential for violence. I am inherently, in ways, a violent being. But I need to accept that. I need to integrate it. And that phase can show a person who can start expressing themselves in violent ways. But what you have to do at that last point is transmute. Turn that energy into something else. That violence then could become your drive, something that gets you up and going every morning, out of a depressive state. It could be a very useful power for you to grasp onto at any given moment. The integration and transmutation, recognizing, the stopping of the projection of the shadow self, of your true being, is how by following your own path within, to kind of like find all these missing pieces of yourself. This is the way to turn the mind into a valuable tool for you on the spiritual path. I really love this topic, and for me it comes because this is actually, I was very religious as a child, but it didn't mean much to me. I didn't really know what religion was. I just loved it because my family loved it. So my family, in many ways, was my religion. But as a teenager, I kind of was very rebellious, and I broke from that. And, I was very atheistic, agnostic at least, and very scientifically minded going into my 20s. And I took a community college class at PCC, Portland Community College, and I have this wonderful teacher for a psychology class who taught us about the the human shadow. She was obsessed with this topic. This was her last class. She was an older teacher. It was her very last class. And she wanted to impart with this very small group, it was about 7 students, the wisdom that she found in a book by Robert Bly called A Little Book on the Human Shadow. And that's exactly what it was. It was a little book on the human shadow. And the book started with this great analogy that stuck with me for ever, till now at least, it's called the long bag we drag behind us. And in the analogy, Robert Bly talks about how when you're a kid, a kid is like this orb of light in all directions. And this orb of light, this child is running through the house, and they're stopped by their mother, who says, little children don't run like that in the house. You say that for outside. And so the child is like, oh no, I know, my mom, I don't want her to dislike me, so I'm going to take this piece of my light, not realizing it's light, and the child, just does it out of love, and throws it in a bag behind them. And, there's various incidents of this at home. They go to school, teacher tells them, use your inside voice. If they haven't been told that by their mother or whatever, they have respect for their teacher. So they take that part of them that likes to scream and shout in the classroom or whatever it might be, and throws that part of their light, that part of their self, into this bag behind them. It's not relegated. It's not only the teachers and the adults. It's not only the parents and the teachers who are causing the child to get rid of aspects of themselves or hide aspects of themselves. It's their peers as well. They're out there and they do something silly out in the playground, and another kid looks at them and is like, you're weird. And that causes them to take more pieces of themselves, their self, and throw it in this bag behind them. He furthers the analogy. He's like, by the time a young boy and a young girl get out of high school, many times will enter into a marriage, a partnership. Excuse me. Then there'll only be two slivers of human beings. They won't even be, half an individual each. If the full individual is the shining orb of light in all directions, when they're ready to enter a relationship, they oftentimes are only a sliver of light, and the two of them don't make for a single human being. Even in their depth of character, their depth of experience, their depth of wisdom, their ability to be themselves. They're more shadow than they are person. And that will create for relationships that, where those two lights will often share that light with one another for a long time, but there'll be so much darkness, so much unincorporated shadow, so much untransmuted shadow between the two of them, that these shadow tendencies will come and they will butt heads and cause a lot of conflict throughout their whole life. The reason for that is because the shadow is parts of ourselves that we are scared of being, that we are scared of expressing. But since they are inherently a part of ourselves, we need to express these aspects of ourselves. Otherwise, they will be like a caged animal that, when it's finally let out, will be vicious. He uses the example of males being needing to express their femininity, meaning that they need to express their emotional intelligence. But society has, put the men in this box where they are unwilling to be that way because they feel like it makes them less of a man. Eventually, they do have to find some outlet for their emotion, and this often takes itself in very heinous ways. Violence or rape, or, violence and rape are the main two ways that, men or women probably, sexual abuse of some way or another will express itself if a person puts that part of their being. We have a lot of ideas, conditioning around, our sexual self, that it is or created this kind of like, this frustration within people, being afraid to really express themselves fully. We've made a lot of advances in the years, but there's still a sense that, men are supposed to be one way and women are supposed to be another. All of that is absolute nonsense. It's these are trained ideas. These are conditioned ideas. This isn't being original. This is looking at it through society's lenses and taking it for your own wisdom. This really is, this concept, of the shadow and learning what the true self is, does tie in a lot to the idea of conditioning being a cage, because a person will stand by their sense of self, their false sense of self, the sense of self that is unable to integrate their shadow, because they believe it's of their own creation. They feel such a sense of pride when it comes to who they are. And this sense of pride, is the major tower that needs to be broken down so that a person can see that, you can be so much more. Just because you get a sense of pride and psychological attachment to this idea of who you are, doesn't mean it's right. And it oftentimes doesn't take into account the amount of misery and unhappiness that having this attachment to you being a certain way causes. This is a massive topic. I want to talk a little bit about the various phases. Projection is the main way that people who are not in contact with their subconscious being will express their shadow self. Projection manifests by looking out at the world, people close or not close to you, and seeing negative qualities in them. They're stupid, or they're weak, or they're ugly, they're fat, whatever, all these negative qualities. And that's projection. And what is really going on here when you're looking out in the world, I use this as why I talked about the school or the class that I took was because this was really the beginning of my spiritual path. I didn't know it at the time, but by analyzing the psychological pieces of my being, I was able to start to, really start to dive deep, start to look for my soul, my spirit, even though I didn't believe in it at the time. And a little frozen, but that's okay. And so I started really taking this concept of finding out what projection is and turning it around on myself. Anytime that someone would bring me some sort of negativity, anytime someone would make me mad or angry, I would think to myself, what is it about this person that is making me mad? What is it about this person, this situation, that is causing me such anguish? And I would turn that around onto myself, and I would be like, might look at them, and I might think something like they're stupid, and then I would be like, how am I ignorant though? If I'm considering this person is ignorant, then that must mean I'm projecting my shadow. And sometimes that might not have been true. Eventually, years later, I would find that I wasn't projecting my shadow, and I wasn't actually angry at them, but if I even had a negative thought, I would turn it around on myself. And I think this is an absolutely wonderful exercise that, since my video is frozen now, I'll probably leave everyone off with, is that look at yourself, reflect on yourself, introspect in this way by finding your moments of frustration, finding your moments of negativity, where you're looking out in the world and you're seeing it in a very negative light. And instead of continuing the thought process of why are they so negative, or just being angry at them, take it and turn it around and ask yourself, how do I express these negative qualities as well? And that will be the first step to stopping your projection and creating a false reality. If you are able to find this quality within yourself, you don't need to become despondent. You don't need to become negative. You don't need to become hateful. You don't need to get down on yourself. This is the first step to transmuting this negative quality into something useful and good. Something that you can use to define yourself, but that it'll take a different light, such as violence being turned into drive. I'm going to come back and do another video on the shadow after this one, since I froze up here. I just started talking about projection, but I really do need to talk about how to integrate and how to transmute these aspects of your being. So I hope you all have a good night, and I will talk to you soon.